everybody, and welcome to another great episode of My EdTech Life. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful Monday, or it may be well into Tuesday, depending on where you are joining our live show in the world. As always, thank you so much for making us part of your day, part of your listening pleasure, viewing pleasure. As always, I appreciate all the support, the likes, the shares, the follows, the YouTube subscriptions, the thumbs up. Thank you all for all of that because, it just really helps our show continue to grow. And more than anything, we just absolutely love to bring you amazing conversations about what's happening in the education space, particularly in technology. So today I am really excited because we're just going to go ahead and continue our conversations that we've been having about the world of artificial intelligence. And today we are being joined by an amazing guest. We have Margie Meacham, who is joining us this evening, and she is going to share her expertise on this topic. And I'm just really excited for her to introduce herself to you all. So, for all our audience members, Margie, who are joining us today or going to be catching this on the replay, if you could, please give us a little brief introduction and what your context in the tech space is. And that way we can go
Sure.
ahead and dive in.
Sure. And thank you so much. I'm so glad I found your podcast and this group here because as soon as I saw it, I thought, oh, these are people I need to talk to. This is, we all care about the same thing. Um, and probably like a lot of folks in the audience, I got into this in a sort of a very roundabout method. See, when I was a little girl, I don't think anyone would have thought I would become a writer or a speaker or a teacher. And I consider myself all those things because I was struggling to learn how to read. Now, I was in first grade and I just couldn't get it. And in fact, my teachers wanted to hold me back. Now, what none of us knew because, and I'm going to have to date myself a little bit, back then dyslexia was not really something people were very aware of. And I was dyslexic, but nobody knew that. All they knew was I couldn't read, I couldn't spell. Teachers um, had different theories. I either was just a really lazy and sloppy worker, or kind of just deliberately refusing to learn, or I was slow, and that was the word they used back then, and therefore should be held back, and the rest of my life, my opportunities would be limited. Um, Fortunately, my parents knew better and insisted that they knew they had a bright little girl, and it was up to the school to figure out how to help me. But it ended up being my baby sister. She was 3 years old, a very, very bright little girl. She taught me how to read by reading Dr. Seuss to me. And just the repetition and the very, very simple words, somehow it stuck. And it was a struggle those first few years, but I finally figured out how to learn. And as I started going through that experience, I realized everyone has those struggles. And that's true today. Everybody's brain is unique. Once you figure it out, then doors open up. Suddenly things are easier. And a lot of things I figured out are now being taught as strategies for people with various different ways of learning. Um, so early on, I wanted to be a teacher because I wanted to help other kids see what I was seeing. And I knew that even the A students were struggling because by the time I managed to be an A student and be valedictorian in my high school class and went on to graduate college, magna cum laude, and all those things, I still struggled. I still had to really work at it. And that's kind of the dirty little secret of learning. So I started expecting to be a teacher. That was my degree, and I got this summer job um, in a business that was just supposed to develop leads for AT&T salespeople to sell data, data connections, high speed internet connections, things like that. Was very new back then. Um, I did so well at it that they hired me as a salesperson. because instead of delivering leads, I just walked in with signed orders. And I think the reason I did that is because all I did was explain how it worked. So that's when I noticed I really had a knack for explaining technology in plain English. So I did that for a while and got so annoyed with the training the company was putting me through, and I knew I could do better. I went back and got my master's degree in education with a specialization in learning technologies. From then on, that's really what I focused on. So I was a freelance consultant starting from there and had a lot of great companies I worked with designing, learning, and training. And started to notice that, and you see this picture of a brain behind me, I started to notice that neuroscience was uncovering new ways to understand how we learn, and that a lot of the learning theories that I studied in school were really not relevant. A few were, but an awful lot of them were really disputed by the physical evidence we now had. Once you can actually watch a brain work, it changes how you teach. So I started focusing on that and had the opportunity to help a lot of teachers and corporate trainers understand the brain. I designed and taught one of the most popular programs that the Association for Talent Development ever had, which was called Brain Based Learning. And I wrote my first book on that, and still doing very well, by the way. And then another interesting thing happened because neuroscience started to converge with AI. After all, they're both studying neural networks, right? And I became one of the first people who was not a scientist to write about this, to notice that this convergence was going on. And all of a sudden, I had neuroscientists talking to me and uh, AI engineers talking to me and saying, "Yeah, you're onto something here." So I didn't leave the application of neuroscience. I followed it where it was headed, which was with AI. So around 2015 or so, I started bringing this to my clients. And of course, some of them thought I was absolutely insane. That wasn't that long ago, but it was a lifetime in AI. So those clients who were open, I started building chatbots and other types of applications that would leverage artificial intelligence and machine learning, sometimes in very, very simple ways, but always in ways that improved the learning experience and sometimes also saved the developers some time, the teachers and the trainers and the instructional designers. And then in 2020, I wrote a book. Now, middle of the pandemic, terrible time to launch a book. I don't think a lot of people read it right away, and those who did thought I was absolutely crazy because the thrust of that book was artificial intelligence applications are out there right now in business. All we have to do is modify them for learning and education. So everyone said, well, you're decades ahead of when we're going to do this. All right, fast forward to 2023. All of a sudden, I look like I'm some kind of a guru. All I did was listen and read and pay attention. But apparently, sometimes if you do those things and you get lucky, then people finally pay attention and listen to you. A year ago, uh, I would go to a conference and be the only one talking about AI. I was just at a major conference and there were 72 of us talking about AI. So the good news is that I'm getting what I always hope for. We're actually using these tools. And the scary thing is we still don't know much about them. So I'm really on a mission to help us all get better and smarter with using AI where it's appropriate and how it's appropriate, and be the ones who help make some of these tough decisions about ethical uses of it, because there's no rule book right now, and we're all uh, pretty much in the same place trying to figure it out. Well,
Absolutely.
that's me.
One of Yeah, and one of the things is like you said, it's like the wild, wild west out there so far,
Mm,
because there's so many
yeah,
people out there that are sharing their experiences. I don't know, the word expert, really gets thrown around out there, but right now, since this is
yeah,
so new, I mean, I would say that there are a handful, maybe two handfuls of really like
Mhm.
experts out there, but a lot of us are sharing our experiences, which is great because we get to learn from one
Yeah.
another, and especially in the education space. Before we get into a little bit of that, because I know that those are some of the questions that now, as we're returning back to school, not only
Yeah.
within the K-12 space, but in the higher ed
Mhm.
space, these are some questions that are out there. And like you talked about, the ethical side of it. And then, as far as using these types of tools for writing, and, how are we going to change things and so on. But one thing that I wanted to ask you, you mentioned, of course, AI and neuroscience is collaborating. I wanted to ask you, with your experience as far as AI and neuroscience collaborating, how can, both of these, or this wonderful collaboration, help enhance and personalize efficient learning experiences?
Yeah. Well, personalized experiences, that's really the holy grail for all of us. It's what we've always been looking for. And particularly personalized experience at some kind of scale. We know we could personalize the experience if every child in America had a one-to-one relationship with the tutor, but that's not going to happen, right? And the same in corporate America. So how do we somehow take what's best about that model and expand on it and clone it and give a real connection and something that's engaging and interesting. And also, when you mentioned efficient, because one of the big things we learned about neuroscience is that there are certain techniques and certain approaches and types of experiences that the brain needs to actually move something from short term to long term memory. So, if we are learning a skill, we want our student to do more than just retain it long enough to pass a test, but we want them to actually make it part of who they are and then add to it as they keep learning. To do that, you need to add things like repetition and application, actual help them see how it applies to their own life and help them connect in stories and other ways. But stories are extremely useful when your brain is immersed in a story, like you're watching your favorite movie. All of it is engaged. And that means you have more neural pathways that are available to receive information and to remember that information. Now, the same is true with artificial intelligence. They speak about attention and about training an AI model to pay attention to the thing they want it to learn rather than just dumping a whole bunch of nonsense at it, and then you don't know what you're going to get. So, there are techniques that are beginning to be applied to training an AI model that were directly picked up from understanding how the brain works because there are some designers that think that's the goal is to really build a neuromorphic um, artificial intelligence that behaves very much like a human brain. Now, there's other people who think, no, no, we need to go a completely different way. It's a different type of intelligence and we shouldn't try to just replicate ourselves. We should acknowledge how AI works and we should build for what it needs, just like we should understand how the human brain learns and build training that follows accordingly. I think that they end up meeting in the middle. It's a little bit of both.
Excellent. And one of the points that I wanted to highlight that you mentioned as far as personalized learning experiences, I'm a huge fan of what you just said as far as creating or engineering, as an educator, seeing yourself as that learning engineer, and you are
Mm,
creating this lesson, that experience. And the way you said it, it's something that it becomes part of you, that as you continue to grow from year to year, you just keep adding to that, and that learning
mhm.
becomes you. Like, that's you right
Yeah.
there going. And I absolutely love that. And I think with as many tools as we're seeing out there, one of the things, at least in my space, that I see K-12, is oftentimes we have those pockets of early adopters. And then what'll happen is you'll see a lot of companies, platforms, putting out
Uh,
platforms that kind of duplicate one another in one
Yeah.
way, shape, or form. And then, as teachers, we want to hop on the next big thing because we want to be the first one to put it on Twitter. And then we want to be the first one to do it here and the first one to do it there. My kind of tech, stance is always like, keep it simple, like really pick
Mhm.
one, dive in, learn it like an instrument, where at the very beginning, you're not going to learn how to play, Stairway to Heaven right away in one
Mm.
sitting in 5 minutes, but really dive in, learn the chords, learn how to pick, and so on. And sometimes it may be a little painful and you think, oh, this is taking way too long, but you really need to focus on the objective. What's the end
Right.
result that you're trying to get to? So in your experience with, that you have, not only in the education space, because you're talking very well about education, but I know that you also work with corporate clients. Is this
Mhm.
something that you also see within the corporate world, where you see that instantaneous hop from one platform to another just because of maybe one little extra button or thing that maybe may not make that big of a difference in the end result?
Well, there is something that, we trainers sometimes, call flavor of the month. There's this, tendency to pay attention to whatever seems hot, and unfortunately, what happens is someone who's a senior leader, and they've gotten there because they're really smart people, right? But they don't do the day-to-day work. So, an analogy might be your principal saying, "Hey, we've gotta get some AI going." Well, conversations like that are actually going on in corporate America where someone says to a training manager, for example, I want you to use an AI. They don't really know how or why or but we have to have it. You go out and figure out how. And that's dangerous because it tends to make us just run and chase the nearest shiny thing we can find, and that may or may not be. I have a dog like that. She loves shiny things, and if she can get a hold of it, she'll hide your wedding ring or, um, you know, a cup or uh, and they all end up under the bed. And she doesn't really play with them; she just keeps them there and looks at them. Oh, my shiny things! And unfortunately, sometimes we behave an awful lot like our animal cousins, and that's one thing we do is we just hoard cool stuff, and we can't help it. It's part of how your brain works because it's a survival mechanism to find things that maybe will help me and make sure I know where it is in case I need it. So, um, lots of us collect those kind of ed tech tools and dabble in them and then don't necessarily really use them. We play with them, we experiment. Yeah, that's cool. And then we move on to another cool thing. Now, one thing that slows that behavior down a little bit in corporate America and really anywhere is budget. So the individual practitioners might be hopping around on their own machines, but they're unable to get everybody to agree on one platform to to bring this idea ahead. Like right now, um, I might argue that my favorite video tool, and if you like, I'll send you a list of my favorite tools afterwards, and we can share it with everybody. But it's just my opinion; it's what works for me. I might argue everybody ought to have that. Somebody else would argue for another one. Now, someone at some point has to say, "Well, let's look at our budget and what we can afford." And if one of those names is more recognizable, that might be the one they buy, whether or not it's the best. I actually learned that in my sales career because at the time AT&T was the recognized leader in telecommunications. So we had a saying: no one ever got fired for picking AT&T. Well, there are organizations out there right now, and you can think of them that have that same leadership and cachet, but there might be a smaller, more experimental, more entrepreneurial company that's really leading the way. So, how do you make those choices? And I think you've really hit on it. And can I just call you Fonz? I didn't
Yes, of
really ask
course.
you. Yeah. Um, I think You already said it. It almost doesn't matter. Just start where you are. Start with something. If your company is only going to buy X, even though you might think something else is better, use what they give you. Find where you have the tools already, and you might be surprised. For example, if you are allowed access to the internet, you can probably use Bard, use it in creative mode, and you are talking to Chat GPT 4.0. You might not even realize that. So instead of running out and saying, I need my own personal subscription to ChatGPT, just jump on Bard. So there's a lot of ways to get around what look like roadblocks, um, because artificial intelligence has actually been infused into the substructure for quite a few years now. So it might seem like it just burst on the scene, but it's been there and it's been sort of percolating. And so it's really hard to be in a workplace environment where you can't access some of those tools and some of those features in some way. So figure out what you've got to play with and then start from there.
Yes, excellent advice. And that goes, as an instructional technologist for my district, that's definitely advice that I give to any instructional technologist anywhere. And I always say, just keep it simple. And then, of course, with what you have within your district,
Yeah.
just get clicky with it. You might be
Yeah.
surprised how much you didn't know you could do with what you have available. But at the same time, that allows you to just standardize across the board with one platform. So as you continue to work with teachers, you're training them up, they're understanding a little bit more. Because one of the things that I wanted to ask you is, as far as the conversations that you may be hearing, not only in the corporate space, but maybe even from K-12 and higher ed space, we're talking about the usage, like how much is too much,
Yeah.
how are we going to work with this year?
Yeah.
So Margie, in your experience with your talks, maybe not necessarily in corporate space, because I'm not sure,
Hmm.
maybe they're a little different. So we'll hold off on that, but at least maybe with your connections in your network through K-12 and higher ed, what are some of the things that you're hearing as far as those conversations that are being had?
Well, of course, there's a lot of people who are still concerned about, is this cheating, for example, is probably one of the biggest things that we're talking about. And there was actually a pretty disturbing study just came out from the Journal of Education. A lot of you are probably familiar with this study that, and I may not get these percentages exactly right, but something like 44% of K through 12 students said they fully intend to use AI to do their homework, and 66% of them admitted they believed that was cheating, but they were still going to do it. They were making a conscious choice to cheat. Now, to me, that says more about our society and about some way in which we have failed as the adults in the room, to establish some standards of integrity. That's not AI's fault. That's that's something else entirely. Um, but this whole question of is it cheating or not is a decision that we're all going to have to grapple with for the next several years. Now, I think the best way to use artificial, there are two actually best ways. One is as a learning experience. Teacher can't be available all the time. So one of the wonderful things these conversational AIs can do is talk back to a student. You can, for example, have the student interview a famous person from history and have those responses be in the voice and style and personality of that individual. Let's say we want to interview Abraham Lincoln. The difficulty is that this version of Abraham Lincoln might not tell you the truth, might not actually answer those questions accurately, at least according to historic record, although he will say it very convincingly. So you need to have parameters too. So an interesting assignment might be go interview this pretend Abraham Lincoln, then fact check him. And now you end up with both. Now do a report on that experience. So instead of just go do write a report on Abraham Lincoln, you have that exciting feeling of speaking with them, but you still have to put on your critical thinking cap and go research all the statements of fact he made, which is actually a pretty handy life tool given the world that we adults face today. So I think that would be a good fact checking things that are given to you on the internet is a good skill to start learning at any age. So another thing you can do is you can get feedback on your writing. I did this to experiment with it, and you know, I write for a living. I write books. I write assignments. I picked up some things, certain pet words I was repeating too often. Um, I like long sentences and I like complex sentences with multiple clauses. And you could probably tell that by speaking with me. you know, um, that's not necessarily always the easiest thing to read. So I got some good feedback, and it pointed out some of my strengths, which it's oh good, yeah. So that's a wonderful way for a student to learn how to write better, anyone at any age. Um, some of the um, wonderful things that any language can do are starting to fade away. Things like similes and metaphors, because we have such a very direct, give it to me now type of social media experience. And I think that's a shame. But if I were teaching a writing course, I could have an AI that presented examples and then read the student attempts and say why that was or was not a simile. You attempted to write a simile, what you really gave me was a metaphor. And I studied English to be an English teacher, so that's why these examples come to mind. All the English teachers listening can probably see how long it would take them to give that feedback. So that's the type of information that's unlikely to be incorrect because it's not based on a single fact. The reason that these generative models like ChatGPT do what's been loosely called hallucinate, which is making a mistake. They're not hallucinating; they're making a mistake. Um, but the reason they do that is because they are programmed to please us and to give us as close as they can get to what we ask for. And so they do exactly what any new assistant would do, or, if you hired yourself an intern, and they'll do their best and they'll fill in the gaps. The difference is a human being, most of them will tell you, I'm not really sure about this, but I think it's this. Whereas the AI models just say, as appointment of fact, this is what it is. And that may or may not be true, but what they're doing is they are using predictive reasoning, which is one of our great powers in the human brain. So there's a great example of porting that neuroscience concept over and looking for a pattern, filling in the gaps, and drawing what might be a reasonable conclusion. So, for example, you mentioned my bio, it's up on my website. Just for fun, I had ChatGPT look up my bio because it's out there in the public domain. There's various versions of it. And what it did was give me a PhD from MIT, which I do not have. It gave me 2 children, which I've never had the pleasure of children. So it was working off statistics that a woman of my age, with my level of education, with the type of work I did, probably had these other things. And it just filled in details that aren't true. And every time I ask it, I get a different result. So if you just want to have some fun, set up an account with OpenAI and see what ChatGPT thinks your life story is, because it'll probably not get it 100% correct. There's some wonderful things it can do to save you time. So I said there's 2 big things that we can use with it right now. One is student engagement, individual personal engagement, one-to-one. And the next time that learner comes back to that AI model, they are remembered and the conversation is remembered and they can pick up where they left off. It's not the generic e-learning where the same information goes out to everyone. You read it, you point and click, and then it goes to the next module. And even if you already know that information, you can't skip it in most cases because it's designed. What the AI can do is evaluate exactly where you're at and give you exactly what you need. They're doing that extensively in China and have been for years, even before ChatGPT was available. It's one of the examples in my book. And I said, if they can do it, why can't we? Oh, I got all kinds of letters about, well, here's why we can't do it. Now, of course, we're all trying to do it. So that's one of the things that we can do is just how, if this were a real human, what would a human do? How much of that can I give the program to do, the algorithm to do? The other thing is it can just save us all a ton of time. I just created an introductory video for a workshop I'm working on. And only 6 months ago, I would have written the script from scratch. I would have started with an outline and then spent maybe several days really perfecting this script and then recording my voice. And because I'm not a professional voice actor, I would make all kinds of little hiccups and ums and, breaths and have to edit that. And that usually took even longer. Try and get it something I was happy with. Then I would pick out images and build a PowerPoint deck that I would then animate. And then I would have to cut up my voice into little pieces to match with that. And what I'd end up with, the 2 minutes of video with maybe 100 hours work. Now, that's just me. Maybe other people can do it a little faster. But I can now go into a tool like Hourly and give it my script, and it will find the images, and it will break it up into scenes, and it will do the animations. And if I want, it'll put a voiceover on it, but it won't sound like me. So if I go to another tool like 11 Labs, I can get a voice that actually sounds creepily like me. I mean, really a lot like me, where it is hard to tell that it's not me if you weren't me. Um, but the other thing that might happen with that, they call it being unstable. It's the equivalent, the audio equivalent of being hallucinating. And 11 Labs says it right on their thing is that if you work with the file too much, it might become unstable. So on my fourth effort, I suddenly still sounded like me, but I sounded like me in great distress, screaming in a panic, the
Oh,
script. So, but talking really fast whoa, not what I want. So, some of the image platforms. So I played around with my headshot and said, be creative with this. Well, obviously I needed to give more instruction to my intern because I got a horse's head. I got a melted face. I mean, it all I was looking for was maybe a new hairstyle, you know? So, one of the things that you learn very quickly is you have to be extremely specific with what you want. This is something our students need to learn too, because it will be part of their everyday work life. So, go ahead and let them find these crazy things out and go ahead for themselves and try and see what they get. Um, but there are practical things for us right now. I saved I did that in 2 hours instead of 100, maybe even 80. So, what would you do with that extra time?
oh my,
You could spend it more strategically, you could spend it more deeply, or gosh, here's a thought, spend it with your family and your friends, or just having a chance to breathe. Now, in corporate America, there's something going on that's called the Great Resignation. People have been so stressed out for so long, and it was kind of always true, but COVID really accelerated this phenomenon because everyone knew we were working from home. And so why not have back to back to back to back meetings all day long, 7, 8 hours of meetings, at each of which meeting you got something else you had to do. So now you've got 10, 12 hours just to survive that day, and it starts all over again. People got burned out. People started quitting, and employers were like, "What?" And unfortunately, I don't think, just being very um, direct and opinionated here, I don't think most of corporate America has recognized their responsibility in all that, and the fact that doubling down on that hyper scheduled, high expectation environment is not doing you any favors. Well, now we're seeing it's happening in education too. Teachers and professors leaving the profession because of the burnout effect. What can AI do? It can loosen that stranglehold, that demand, that pressure, that of having to do what's urgent instead of what's important.
Yeah.
Most of what we do could be at least partially delegated to an AI as long as we're ready to check the work, which would be if you could hire an assistant tomorrow, very few of us have that luxury. That's exactly what you would do. And so if you start to look at it that way, if you sat down and made a list of all the things in your work that you wish you didn't have to do. For example, there's some really wonderful applications that will read a course and write a quiz. And you might change a question or two, but very often it's exactly what you need. Um, there are others that will, I mentioned, make video, make audio, make music, um, license free. So you don't have to go searching license free resources, to be ethical. Everyone talks about the ethical risk, but it also can help you be ethical because if you generate it yourself, then you may not have any concerns. Now, if you say, take this piece of art from this well known artist and modify it, now you're in gray water. Now I'm not sure. And nobody is. So, there are some do's and don'ts, some things to think about. Um, and if the instructors can do these things, why not also share that path with your students as you think it's possible? So, what I see in corporate America is mostly on the content creation side. Let's use it within the training team to make our work more streamlined, to make it more enhanced, and maybe use these conversational bots for review, for practice, um, for reminders. How much more engaging to have a little character pop up, and say, "Hey, Fonz, you haven't been in your leadership course for a week. Can I take you there now, or what's the deal? What's going on?" Isn't that something you'd want a personal coach to do if you had that flexibility? We should be thinking like that. We should be hiring assistants.
Absolutely. And one of the things that you hit on, I think the biggest, uh, I guess, selling point that I hear, at least within my space, which is the K-12 space, like you mentioned, is getting that time back. There's a couple of platforms out there. There's a couple of gentlemen that I have interviewed, and they've come up with some wonderful platforms with the end goal of, like you mentioned, and I've always been a big proponent when I first started this position was if we have to roll out an app or roll out some kind of platform, I always try and tell the teachers, I know that this may seem like something else on your plate, but really
Mhm.
with this something else, I'm going to try and remove that other
Right,
piece, so at the end of the day you can have at least those 5-10 minutes of decompression time where you can just sit with the lights off at your desk and just breathe. If I can do that, then I think we're going to win. But now with these platforms that we see, what I love about it is, like you mentioned, I love to say that these are my personal assistants, because they really
yeah.
are. Just the other day, right now you were talking about creating video. For
Mhm.
myself, I have to continually create videos or create how to
Oh, yeah.
modules and things of that sort. And now with the help of this, not only does it help me save that time, but the fact that it allows me to get my thoughts in order, because I'll just bring bullet points of, these are the objectives, this is what I need to see, this is what I want to say and convey, and then just have it pull a script for me that really gets my tone, and then the objectives, and in a way that's lined up and coherent, where I'm like, oh man, yes, this is what I needed, because sometimes my ideas are just all over the place, but this has really helped.
Yeah.
The other thing that I love about it too is the the fact that it gives you, or these platforms give you as an educator, the ability to improvise, adapt, and overcome. And
Yeah.
really, the examples that I give are, if I have a new student that comes in that day,
Mm,
and all of a sudden I'm in a fifth grade classroom, but let's say they're the third grade reading level,
yeah.
I can take whatever it is that we're reading, pop it into one of these platforms, and say, hey,
Yep.
can you recreate this text at a third grade level? But we're
Right.
still on the same page per se, but
Yeah.
just different words. And that's what I love, that instead of taking hours at the end of the day, or relying on, maybe if there is a department that'll do that for you to work with accommodations and so on, you can do it right then and there on the spot,
Right.
and then you get to go in deeper. You don't feel like, oh, well, the student's going to need to get pulled out. No, no, they really don't, because now
Yeah.
I can have them in class. They still have similar texts, just the verbiage is a little different, but we're all in there learning the same
Right.
story. And I love the fact that I don't feel like I'm going to single a student out. So I've saved time. I have my student in my class. I'm still building that community. We're all learning at the same pace, just at a different reading level. And that's the one thing that I love there. And the fact that the teachers get to do that right away and get their time back, through lesson plans, through additional activities, and then they get to go deeper into
Yeah.
the lessons. And those are some of
Right.
the things that really excite me. And I'm just like, yes, because it goes back to the learning experience, providing that
Yeah.
amazing learning experience that's not just at the surface level anymore. We get to go in a little bit deeper and go into the why, the how, and make those connections into the real world. The other thing that I love too is you kind of make it relevant, or you make it fun for the students. I've seen teachers on TikTok that'll use some AI, and their word problems, they'll say, hey, you know what? I noticed that the majority of my kids really love, let's say, Harry Potter. So then
Oh.
they'll just say, write me here's the standard,
Mhm.
4.4H for Texas, where you're dealing with
Yeah.
remainders, but make it in a Harry Potter theme. And then it'll crank
Yeah.
out. And so the students get to have a little bit of fun with that and recognize the characters. You're still teaching math, but you're making it a little bit more fun. So those little wins can go a long way. And the return on
Yeah.
instruction is huge, because now you've got the
Yeah.
students that are engaged. And so those little things I see are really going to help out our educators, because, like you mentioned, the burnout is real and the burnout is there. So we need to really consider these tools. Now, on the other hand, too, it's very important that we have those conversations with our stakeholders, which are the higher ups
Mm.
too, the directors and superintendents, because
Mhm.
I don't know about you, but oftentimes the case is if you finish this really fast,
Mm.
what are you doing?
It
Like, it's almost very
Yeah.
punitive that you're that good at your
Right.
job, that even if you finish quick, it's almost like, what, like, is there an issue? Is there a problem? Like,
Yeah.
it's punitive. And so now it's like, hey, you have to understand that we're in this together. This is what we're trying to do, and lighten that load. And it doesn't mean that they're working any less. It's just that they're working smarter, not
Right.
harder. And now
Yeah.
you get to go in deeper.
Right, and that going deeper, which might even just be a thought process, but you now have time to do it, that's still work. The fact that, we can't necessarily, um, match it to, a specific deliverable like a course outline or a lesson plan because that's already done, and the added things, are coming from us. Um, that is part of what people have to get used to, and the idea that your job is probably not going to be replaced. Certainly, most jobs won't in the near future, but it will be transformed, and that might mean fewer hours. That doesn't make it less valuable, probably makes it more valuable. You're probably delivering more value in fewer hours. So you've nailed it on the head. And I'll take that example one step further. Now the teacher has converted this material, this reading material, to an appropriate reading level for that student. Show that student how to do that for themselves. Until they catch up, they now are at home in any of their other classes, um, not just the one where the teacher happens to be looking forward for them and ready to take that on. So, teach the students in the context of their own learning challenges, kind of goes back to the start of our discussion. Um, because, for example, some dyslexic students would be better off with audio delivery. So, you can have an AI, and if you can get an AI in your own voice reading the textbook to you, there's a really interesting thing that happens. You pay more attention to your own voice, which is why that's a very good study technique for people who don't like to study, is record yourself teaching yourself. And the act of doing that, and when your brain hears it, it's sort of interpreted as though it's already internalized. It's, that little voice we hear inside. So there's a lot of fun little interesting phenomena that have been discovered through studying our crazy brains and our animal cousins. And to some extent, we can use them to make learning more fun and to use these AI tools in new creative ways. And I will say this, I tell all of my corporate training friends, go make friend with the teacher because they're generally far more creative because they have learned how to do more with less their entire career. And that goes especially for technology. So, instead of having all kinds of corporate dollars getting you the latest and the greatest, teachers have to figure these things out and generally very often end up using free tools or open source tools and working together and helping each other. That is the essence of learning. That actually makes teachers much more knowledgeable and skilled than many, many corporate trainers right now when it comes to these new AI tools because they're not afraid to just jump out and use them, and nobody's telling them not to.
There you go. Yes, I absolutely
Yeah.
love it. And just going along with our conversation, like you mentioned, it's also with the AI based tools, also making learning accessible for all, thinking about that
Mm.
accessibility. And like you mentioned too, even those different modalities. And, it's interesting. 2 shows ago, we had Ginger Dewey here who also mentioned something like that, that was very similar to what you said, which for her, she had done a study because she worked in higher ed too as well, is that even, she says that about 13% of undergraduates use accessibility tools, even though they don't need them, but just
Mm.
because it's something that's helpful to them.
Right.
So she also mentioned something where she said, it's interesting about when you hear somebody read, like they'll go to like a text to speech, and having a different voice for different subject really also helps you understand and making those connections. So like you mentioned there too, I can definitely see myself trying to teach
Yeah.
myself. It's like
Right.
I have my inner monologue on anyway. So
Yeah.
there you go.
Well, and you
Absolutely.
can take that anywhere. You have that on
Mhm.
your phone, and you've got a free 5 minutes. You're waiting for the movie to start or something. Well, you get a little bit of your textbook read. So I'm also finding a lot of college students, especially love those mobile apps, love to take advantage of doing just weaving their work in with their life rather than say, oh, I have to sit down and study for 2 hours now. Um, and you might not be able to persuade today's students to do that, but you can persuade them to carry their tutor with them and take advantage of time when it presents itself. So it's another thing to think
Excellent.
about.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, Margie, this has been an amazing conversation. There's definitely enough for a part two. So I'm openly giving you an
Okay.
invite as a guest of My EdTech Life. You are part of my PLF, which is my personal learning family, and you always
Yeah.
have an open invitation.
Oh,
So hopefully
thank
we can
you.
schedule a part two soon as well so we can continue this conversation because it was just so helpful and you shared so much that I'm anxiously eager to digest and go through again. And obviously, I'm
Yeah.
really excited about our audience members, whether they're going to be watching the replay or re-listening to the podcast. All the wealth of information that you shared was amazing. So thank you so much, Margie, for being
Yeah.
here on the
Thank
show.
you.
I really appreciate it. But before we wrap up, we always love to end the
Yeah.
show with the
Yeah.
following 3 questions. And before we get
Okay.
to our questions, I definitely want to give a shout out to our sponsor, alongside care. Alongside care is a mental health support and personalized student app that can be used
Mm.
to help and alongside meet students where they are with tier 1 support and does not place any additional burdens on faculty and staff. So if you're interested, please make sure you visit alongside.care, alongside.care. So thank you so much, Alongside, for sponsoring this segment and sponsoring our show. All right. So, Margie, here we go. Question number one.
All right.
All right. So, we know that kryptonite is what weakens Superman. So,
Yeah.
in this case, what is, or what would you say is your current AI kryptonite?
I think it is something that's called the paralysis of choice. That's a psychological, goes back to my psychology days. And just like everyone else, there is so much out there. I read a lot of peer reviewed journals. I subscribe to a lot of newsletters. Um, in a given day, I tracked it last week just because I do those things. And on average, I became aware of 75 new tools or platforms every day. Now, how can you possibly absorb all of that and choose? So I've kind of gotten the personal triage of, yeah, cool, but I wouldn't use that. Or, oh, that's interesting. And try to zero in on one a day. But very often I find myself going down a rabbit hole and I've clicked on different links and, oh, that looks cool for maybe an hour before I realize what I've done. So I'm going to have to get another one of these AI assistants that weeds through all that for me and says, Margie, here's the one thing for you to know today. I haven't found that yet. So if anyone's building that, please let me know. But that's my kryptonite. I can't stop. It's mesmerizing right now. And that can keep you from just starting. So, but one thing I did do was at least just grab a few things and start them. So, and then you know what? If you don't like it, stop. Pick another one. Um, so be careful with that yourself. There's probably a few other people have that kryptonite.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That's a great answer. All right, here we go. Question number
Yeah.
two is, if you could have a billboard with anything on it, what would it be and why?
Yeah. I thought about this for a long time because I wanted to keep it simple. And I told you that's hard for me. Um, you were born to learn. We are all, that's what we evolved to do. That's what your brain does. It is your number one survival skill. It is the only thing that kept us alive as a species because we weren't the biggest or the strongest or the fastest, but we were the smartest and we learned. Actually, we weren't maybe not even the smartest, but we were the best at learning and teaching each other. We were all born to do that. Nobody is naturally bad at school or naturally bad at tests. That's all baloney. That's learned behavior. Your innate ability is genius ability, and that's what you need to know.
Oh, I love that. A great answer. Thank you so much, Margie. And the last question is, if you can turn one of your hobbies or maybe favorite pastimes into a full-time profession, what would it be?
I actually tried to do this when I was younger because I love playing golf. Now I'm in the great place for that because I live in Arizona, as you know. Not too many days you can't play golf if you're willing to put up with a little heat. Wonderful golf courses. Um, And so in my 20s, I thought, wouldn't it be great to just buy a golf course and run it? And it turns out that that is very hard to do. So, not luckily, I found that out before I actually bought a golf course. So, some hobbies are hobbies for a reason. They're better left that way, and let the professionals, produce the experience for you.
There you go. Excellent. Well, Margie, thank you so much again for being here with us this evening, joining us from Arizona. Thank you so much again for the wealth of knowledge that you shared. I am just, again, so excited for our audience members that are going to be catching this on the replay. And Tanya, thank you so much for joining. And we had a couple of other viewers from LinkedIn that stopped by. So big shout outs to you. And again, thank you as always. And like I mentioned before, you do have that open invite. So anytime that you say, hey, Fonz, there's something great that either I'm working on or I want to talk about, hey, you shoot me a DM and we will make it happen for sure. So
Okay,
looking
you've
forward,
got it.
you're looking
Yeah.
forward to that DM in the near future, my friend.
All
All
right.
right.
Thank
And
you.
for our audience members, thank you again, as always, for your support. As you know, we do this because we have a passion for education, educational technology. So I definitely want to honor all our guests, and we want to honor all our educators, creators, and practitioners that have been on the show to share their knowledge. So please make sure that you visit our website at myedtech.life, myedtech.life, where you can check out this amazing episode and the other 215 wonderful episodes, where you can go ahead and grab some knowledge nuggets and sprinkle them onto what you are already doing great. So please make sure you visit our website. Make sure that you follow us on all your favorite podcast players at My EdTech Life. Follow us on all socials. Please visit our YouTube channel and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Give us a thumbs up. That'll go a long way also to help continue to grow our show. And if you would love to contribute to our mission of connecting educators and creators one show at a time, please feel free to drop by our merch store there on our website, where you can get yourself some My EdTech Life swag. And of course, all of that continues to go back to the show so we can bring you some amazing conversations like we did tonight. So thank you guys, as always, for all of that support. And as always, my friends, until next time, don't forget, stay techie.